Agua.
This suspect, DePape, is consumed with politics. It's the most important thing in his life, as it is for too many Americans right now. And my advice, back off. Back off a little bit. You'll see it for what it is. This is a great country, not because of our politicians. We're a great country despite our politicians. Whether you're rooting for the right or whether you're rooting for the left, fine, we need them. Let them do their jobs. Count them in or count them out depending on how they do each task. But don't cheerlead for one side or another, and don't hate the other. This is not about love and hate. They're politicians. Love your kids. Love your wife. Love your family. Love your friends. Don't love a politician. It's a freaking politician. I want to welcome you all to what this show is all about here on Rick Sanchez News. And I think it behooves me to talk to you about some of the things that are happening right now in this country, which are extremely troubling. And yet I think it's important for us to learn from them. And it has to do with a certain level of hate that we're seeing where people are just personalizing politics. There are so many things that I could give you as advice, as your friend, that are important in this world. There's your family. There's your religion. There's your sense of faith. There's our planet. There's your health. There are so many things that are important. Your education, your ability to learn new ideas from new people. There are so many things that we're ignoring because so many of us right now are fixated on politics. Politics, and nothing else, to the point where we're ready to hurt, maim, kill, announce our intentions to the world. I want you to know that we're so happy you're here. You can follow us on Spotify. You can follow us on Apple. And so many of you are, because we give a little bit of a different perspective here on Rick Sanchez News. And it has a lot to do with how we can become maybe more sane again. Suzanne and I, my wife, we just decided to go to Minnesota, where I went to school. We watched the Minnesota Golden Gophers, my alma mater, play Rutgers, and they won, and it was exciting. And then we drove around northern Minnesota, the rural parts of Minnesota. We stayed in a little cabin up in Mille Lacs Lake and did some walleye fishing. It was so nice. I love my wife so much, and we've been together mostly all of our lives. And when we get a chance to go and take little trips like this, little forays, it's important for us. And then we drove to Duluth and up the Lake Superior coastline, which is no different than the coast of California, with cliffs and lighthouses. And it's so beautiful. But along the way, as you drive through rural Minnesota, just like when you drive through any other city in the United States that's rural, because I witnessed the same things in parts of Virginia and in parts of Florida, you start to see what the mindset is of our country right now, of America. And you see people who have signs in their front yard. And it's not just a Trump sign or a Biden sign or their favorite politician sign. It's not just I vote Democrat or I vote Republican, and we all have a right to vote for whoever we want to vote. No, most of the signs don't reflect what they're for. Many of them reflect what they're against. It's about hating. It's about why the other side needs to be eliminated. It's horrible, horrible, nasty verbiage, and you can't help when you read this and ask yourself, has there ever been a time in this country when we've been this divided? When we've been this siloed? Well, of course, that was the Civil War. But at least in the Civil War, it was one part of the country against another part of the country. Now it's all mixed in. You're driving down the street and you'll see one sign, then another sign, but they're all, generally speaking, very hateful. So what is this mindset that we suddenly have, and why should we be making politics, and politicians no less? With all due respect to our elected officials, they're not the most important part of our country. They're just not. I mean, they're just not. Not whether you want to make them the worst people or the best people, they're just politicians. They're just elected officials. Some are good, some are bad, and mostly all of them are corrupt because the system is corrupt. And we know that. And it's generally not a Democrat or a Republican thing. It's a political thing, an America thing. They're just corrupt. The only way they can stay in office is for someone to give them money for causes, and they take the money. All of them take the money. So yeah, that's troubling. But we make the politicians our worst enemies and our greatest heroes. And let me just tell you something. They're not worthy of that. No politician, whether it's the one you like or the one you hate, is worth that much of your time thinking about them. They're just not. But somehow we're consumed right now with these people. Can I say something to you? Stop it. Stop it. That's not how we become great. That's not how we become a great country. And that's not how you become a great person. If you're spending most of your time thinking about Biden or thinking about Trump, you're wasting your life. You're wasting your life. I mean, that's my advice to you. Find something else. Plant. Go out and grow a garden. Read a book. Think about other things. I mean, there's no better incident right now of what's happening in this country than what just happened to Paul Pelosi. I mean, if you haven't heard the story, you're living in a cave. But then again, I think this is a remarkably important story because it could be a pivot point for our country to see that something like this happens and that someone is so filled with rage and hate that they're capable of this. And look, I'm not coming at this as a Democrat or as a Republican. I'm just coming at this from an American standpoint, from a humanist standpoint. I think this is very important, and we should capture it to learn from it. Yesterday on the plane back from Minnesota with my wife, I was watching TV, on that little monitor they put in front of your seat, and I happened to be watching CNN, and I counted, and it wasn't the first story they covered, this Paul Pelosi thing, and it wasn't the second thing, and it wasn't the third story, and it wasn't the fourth, it was number 5. And I thought to myself, so wait a minute, a man with a hammer tries to kill the second most important person in our government because, like her or not like her, Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House, right? I mean, after you leave the executive office and you go from president, vice president, it's her, right? So after the executive branch, she's it. Legislative branch. She would take over if something happened to the president and the vice president. And someone wants to kill her or kidnap her in broad daylight by breaking into her home and hitting her husband over the head and cracking his skull with a hammer. That's got to be a top story. But it was 5 on CNN. And I thought to myself, how could that be? But here's the story.
Tonight, federal authorities detailing a shocking, politically motivated hammer attack on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul, that fractured his skull. According to the affidavit, 42-year-old David DePape telling police that he was going to hold Nancy hostage and talk to her, and if she lied, he was going to break her kneecaps. DePape allegedly describing the speaker as the, quote, leader of the pack of what he said were lies told by the Democratic Party. DePape also later explained that by breaking Nancy's kneecaps, she would then have to be wheeled into Congress, which would show other members of Congress there were consequences to actions.
There were consequences to actions, and they wanted to use this. DePape fella apparently wanted to use this as an example of what he was going to do to the other political enemies that he had developed in his head. You see what I'm saying? This suspect, DePape, is consumed with politics. Obviously, it's the most important thing in his life, as it is for too many Americans right now. And my advice, back off. Back off a little bit. You'll see it for what it is. This is a great country not because of our politicians. We're a great country despite our politicians. Whether you're rooting for the right or whether you're rooting for the left, fine, we need them. Let them do their jobs. Count them in or count them out, depending on how they do each task. But don't cheerlead for one side or another, and don't hate the other. This is not about love and hate. They're politicians. Love your kids. Love your wife. Love your family. Love your friends. Don't love a politician. It's a freaking politician. What the hell is going on with you? I have to say, Americans, America, you, whoever you are who are listening to the sound of my voice, I mean, come on. Stop making it all about politicians. They're not that important. They are not worth so much of your time. Good God. Joining us now, Samantha Barrios. Samantha's an activist and Florida State Director for Giffords. Gifford, as you know, was Gabby Gifford, who was shot in Arizona once by someone who, again, made it all about her. He hated her, and he was going to take her out. So he shot her in a horrible, despicable crime, which seems to be repeating itself way too much in this country. And now we have this case with Paul Pelosi. Samantha, thanks so much for joining us. I guess when you heard the news about this, it probably harkened back feelings to the Gabby Gifford experience, correct?
Yeah, Rick, thank you so much for having us today. Yeah, it was triggering for us, for many of us in the organization and in the movement, thinking about a hateful crime and how someone, can go against a politician who has been representing us all because she was elected. She got into that position because the Americans thought, that she needed to be there. So it was shocking. And I mean, many other things, we were thankful that it wasn't a gun that he had in his hand, because probably the outcome would have been totally different and tragic.
Well, one of the things that's interesting about talking to you is you are from Venezuela. So as a Venezolana, you understand what it's like to see when a government gets ripped up by itself, when one side goes after the other side and the political atmosphere gets so heated and so angry that it tears a country apart. Because needless to say, Venezuela is in shambles and has been for quite some time. And it's politically activated, and there's a lot of hate in that country. When you see what's happening now in America, does it also make you hearken back to the experience in your country?
Yes, it is inevitable. For me, for many other Latin American brothers and sisters that, have fled our countries because of violence. And it's triggering and it's concerning, and it's, something that I have in my mind every single day. And it's one of the main reasons because, why I do what I do. We can't go back to our countries, but the most important thing is that this is our new home, and we can't settle for violence. We can't settle for hate. We can't settle for the disrespect of not only, any citizen in this country, but also for elected officials who we have put in place. So yes, it's very concerning.
Yeah, and let's listen to the next clip. This is another clip that we gathered from what's been happening with this story. Let's take a listen.
The federal affidavit claiming DePape told police that he broke into the house through a glass door early Friday. DePape stated that Pelosi was in bed and appeared surprised, adding he told Pelosi to wake up and that he was looking for Nancy. Moments later, at 2:23 a.m., according to the affidavit, Pelosi was able to go into the bathroom, which is when he was able to call 911.
It's interesting that it appears, without any equivocation, to me at least, that DePape, David DePape, the suspect in this case, went there with the express purpose of either killing Nancy Pelosi, maiming Nancy Pelosi, or kidnapping Nancy Pelosi, because he was found with tie bars that apparently he was going to use on her, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He was also screaming he wanted to find her. So yeah, it's just troubling on so many levels. And as I said again, thankful that it wasn't a gun, because I'm
the fact that a citizen was so consumed that he wanted to take out Nancy Pelosi and use her as an example. What does that say to you about the state of politics in America right now?
It's polarizing. It's just, a lot of people just trying to get their facts from places they probably shouldn't be getting them, but also spreading them out. And unfortunately, we have as a consequence, a group of people who have decided to take, the destiny in their hands, which is extremely dangerous for any kind of democracy.
But you say polarizing. That's interesting because polarizing means there are, as I often say, silos, which mean people live in different camps and they only know what they know or what they want to hear. They are self-polarized, correct?
Yes, they have, isolated themselves. And unfortunately, we're not listening to each other right now. Something extremely dangerous as we head to, elections.
Let me ask you a question. In fact, let's listen to this clip, and then I want to ask you a question on the backside of this. Here it is.
Tonight, authorities investigating social media posts they increasingly believe the suspect made, including wide-ranging, unfounded conspiracy theories, including the false claim that Biden lost the 2020 election. Within hours on social media, amid the news of the attack, authorities warning they were already seeing posts applauding the attack.
By the way, that was not his only, what some would call controversial conspiratorial idea that Biden lost the election. He also believed in a lot of other conspiratorial ideas. So my question to you is this: how much of what is happening to citizens in America today, like happened apparently to David DePape, where he was consumed with this political hate that he was apparently carrying around with him, how much of that is attributable to social media, to all of these places out there where people live for hours and hours on end, talking to other people who may also believe whatever crazy idea from the left or whatever crazy idea from the right that they are fed?
Yeah, well, we know that social media these days plays an important role in this kind of acts, but unfortunately, there's more than that. There's more than that. There are mental illnesses. There's easy access to guns. There are other aspects that play a role in this, and that should be taken into account with this misinformation too, as I mentioned before. So I think that the only way in which we're going to be able to get a handle of this is just to come to senses, and as you said before, try to come into the middle and try to understand each other without committing any type of crime or accessing guns or just simply revenging with the other because you have a different point of view.
Somebody who votes for Donald Trump or somebody who votes for Nancy Pelosi should not be your enemy simply because they voted for somebody that you wouldn't vote for, right? We know this. You know this. I know this. Many of my friends are Democrats and many of my friends are Republicans, and I can have conversations with them. I think I'm one of the few Americans who could say that. That's troubling.
Yes, it is. It is. I grew up in Venezuela, in Caracas, and we always admired this democracy where everyone was welcomed. And it's unfortunate that we're living in a world in which we don't listen to each other anymore, where we don't have honest conversations without, bringing our rage in. So,
but is it our fault? Because you're right. And if I could do anything with this podcast that I'm doing now, and we tend to focus on Latino issues, we tend to think that as Latinos in this country, we're actually a little bit more fair-minded about politics. We don't beat each other up about politics, interestingly enough, in this country. We have a wider angle lens about politics, but many of our friends and many of our cohorts don't see it that way. So my question to you is, can we self-police and get ourselves out of this quagmire? Or is there something out there that is causing this, which has too much of an influence on us where we can't repel it? And by that, I mean a manipulative media, a corporate media who just wants to make money by making us fearful and hate each other. Social media, which allows us to live in these silos all of these things together play a part in this hate that we have been describing. Is that what we should try to eliminate somehow, do you think?
Well, I'm an eternal optimistic, and I mean, I do agree with everything that you have said, but I also think that it's up to us, with people like you, people like myself, who are committed to work in our communities, to bring people together, to speak the truth out, to not give up. We can't give up on this country. We can't give up on believing in our democracy and believing on having fair conversations. So it will be up to us to keep this democracy fair, to keep having honest conversations, and just simply shying away from violence and hate. It'll be to every single citizen in this country. And I know that there's a ton of people who have been radicalized, but I honestly think that as long as we keep doing our job, we will succeed. We can't just give up on this.
You say people have been radicalized. What does that mean to you, that they've been radicalized? This gentleman, DePapi, the suspect, he was radicalized?
For example, like, there are many issues. For example, and I gotta speak about this because this is who I'm representing today, Giffords. It's so hard these days, for example, to have a conversation around gun safety or gun violence prevention. But when you make people understand that we can be safe around guns, for example, Giffords has a gun owners for safety, aspect of our organization.
Mm-hmm.
And when you bring them to terms to understand that we can be respectful of the Second Amendment, and be safe around guns, we open minds, we move the conversation to a different level. So I guess that we can use that in every single aspect, try to bring people to the middle, have an honest conversation with facts, without getting our emotions in the middle. And that way we move ahead.
Yeah, I think, if we would look at Nancy Pelosi, if you happen to be one of those persons who just despises Nancy Pelosi because you've heard horrible things about Nancy Pelosi, because you happen to watch a particular medium that is constantly harping on Nancy Pelosi, and because you think somehow that she is the opposite of everything you stand for and she's evil, which many people do, and shift that away to she's a grandmother, she's a mother, she's a wife, and she happens to be someone who believes in things that I don't believe in because she has a different point of view. It's almost like if we could shift the thinking about whether we're Republican and we want to hate a Democrat, or whether we're a Democrat and we want to hate a Republican, couldn't we just see them as human beings first, and then maybe start looking at their politics, and then maybe disagreeing with their political positions, but not necessarily attacking them? Isn't that what this really comes down to?
Yes, it should be. It should be like that. Yes.
By the way, there's a couple of people who've been commenting on this, and I think sometimes it's not just the incident, but then it's how the incident is portrayed. I don't see any redeeming value or any justification or any mitigation for what this guy, David DePapa, did. First of all, he was in somebody else's house. He had a hammer. He hit someone over the head with a hammer and cracked his skull. A person who happened to be in that house in bed sleeping, according to reports. So I don't know how you can possibly mitigate this thing in any way, but some people are. I'll give you two examples. Here is first Elon Musk.
And Elon Musk, the new owner of the social media giant Twitter, sending out a tweet that included a conspiracy theory about the attack on Paul Pelosi. The tweet taken down hours later without an apology or explanation, though critics say the damage was already done, having sent it out to his 112 million followers.
He said, or in his tweet, he said, I have it here, I'll read it to you, quote, "There is a tiny possibility that there is more to this story than meets the eye." So that is what the Elon Musk, who now owns Twitter, that was his reaction to this story. And a lot of people are criticizing it because it sounds like he is, with that comment, minimizing the action. Do you agree?
I think that tweet could be interpreted in so many ways, and I guess it's very typical from Elon Musk. I I honestly don't really know what he meant with that. It's so vague to me, in all honesty.
That's fair. Let me give you another one. This one is, I think, a little more terse. This comes from Carrie Lake, and she's being criticized because, as heinous as this incident was, it appears in a campaign stop that she's using it as a joke. And it worked because she got a lot of laughter from people who may very well hate Nancy Pelosi as much as David DePappy did. Now, that doesn't mean they're capable of doing something as horrible as what he did, but they seem to be reacting as if they agree with his sentiments that she is not a good person, evil, et cetera, et cetera. Here's that clip.
It is not impossible to protect our kids at school. They act like it is. Nancy Pelosi, well, she's got protection when she's in D.C. Apparently her house doesn't have a lot of protection. But
that is, for me, tough to listen to. They're laughing at someone who had her husband's head bashed in with a hammer. It seems to me to be indicative of the kind of thing that you and I have been talking about that's wrong in our country right now, whether it's from the left or from the right. We're just mean. We're mean.
Yes. I think we have kind of lost a little bit of the empathy that is so characteristic from the American society. And it's really sad. I mean, the fact that she put those sentences together talking about school safety and then making fun of Nancy Pelosi, being hurt with a hammer. What if it would have been with a gun? Would that made it different for her? It's just incredibly sad and ironic at the same time.
And by the way, hammer or gun, I mean, you hit an 80-year-old man over the head and crush his skull with a hammer. There's a real good chance that he's not going to wake up from that shot, whether it's with a bullet or with a hammer. I mean, that is at least I've been a police reporter most of my life, and I've covered many, many stories, and I know that is describing attempted murder.
Yes, it is.
So, I mean, so here's the thing, though, and I'm glad we're talking to you, Samantha Barrios, activist. She's the director in Florida for Giffords. And this incident makes us realize just how far gone we seem to be. Is there anything that you think we can do aside from wishing people would get along, which obviously that's what we want, but is it incumbent upon the government or the media, or what is the agency that could somehow coalesce some kind of better understanding amongst us as Americans?
I think it actually has to be every single aspect of society. I mean, it has to be the media, it has to be government, it has to be with the way we teach our children is the way we impart our moral values and our spiritual values. Everybody has to play a role in this, and it's all on us. It can be just one, it can be just one part of the society thinking they're going to fix the problem. It starts with us as parents in our houses, teaching our children to be empathetic, understanding, inclusive on our thoughts. So it has to be with every single person. People like you with your podcast discussing these issues, and bringing them to, all your viewers.
I understand, by the way, why there's anger. I understand why people are hurting economically in this country. I understand why you would be mad at Democrats, for example, who are in the process now of trying to start World War III with Russia, which I am not for World War III. No thanks. I don't want another war. We've been in too many of them lately. And it's almost hypocritical of us to be criticizing other countries' invasions when we've invaded about 5 or 6 countries just in the last 10 years. So I understand why people would be angry with that. I understand why people would be angry with Republicans who essentially seem to sound like they're all for making sure that every single human being, no matter their age, has a gun. So I understand why people could look at some of the situations that are in this country and being angry about them. I understand why people would be angry that the adjustment Barack Obama and our Congress did to solve the meltdown that occurred in 2008 was essentially to give more and more money to the banks so they can get richer and richer while the rest of Americans make less and less money each and every year. But somehow what happens is most Americans will find that one incident, maybe one of the ones that I just described, or maybe another one, and they'll use that as their recoil, as their immersion of anger to then use against the party. So while I'm saying that it's ridiculous that we make politicians so important, we do sometimes coalesce around a certain issue because we can't understand it. And we think somehow that this candidate is going to fix it when we know he won't. Or that candidate is going to fix it when I know, because I've been doing this all of my life as a journalist at CNN and at Univision and at Fox and at NBC, that they won't and they can't. And most of them don't even want to. But somehow we personalize it. Why is that, Samantha?
I don't know, Rick. I have to disagree on that with you. And if you don't mind me disagreeing.
Of course, no, please.
I truly believe that by elected, the right candidates, we can make changes, in different aspects. We have seen it, on our gun violence prevention movement. When we get to elect gun safety champions, we get to move the needle. We have 45,000 Americans dying every single day because of gun violence prevention. And we were able to pass a law during the summer that had the only gun safety law that has been passed in the past 30 years that will keep us safer around guns. So I'm a big believer that we can make changes. I have not lost hope on politicians, and it's just a matter of electing the correct ones. So, and making sure that that official, that candidate, that elected official who's in office, who's running for office again, it's with their issue and handling, holding them accountable.
Yeah.
Once they are in office. So I think that's part of democracy, and coming from a country where the politicians, hardly speak against dictators. I refuse to give up hope on America's democracy, but we have to fight for it, regardless of, your issue or your side or the side of the spectrum, the political spectrum you lie on.
Do you not agree, though, that to be able to do what you just said, which I agree with you, it's about electing common sense individuals who are able to make the right decisions on the right issues for all of us. But you can't get to that solution until you start to get some of the money out of politics, because too many politicians, and by too many, I mean like 98% of them, want to stay in office. Just like I would like to keep my job, and most Americans want to keep their jobs. And the only way they can keep their jobs is to take money. And that money, oftentimes, if not almost always, leads them to take positions based on who gave them the money. That's a fact.
Yeah,
that's a fact.
We see it all the time. Yeah, we see it all the time. Marco Rubio got $3 million from the NRA, and that's why he just voted against the gun safety bill that we passed over the summer. So yes, I mean, the lobby is present in many aspects of the political spectrum. And it's just a matter of, electing, the right candidate who will not, who will stand up to all these lobbyists and do what is right for the American citizens.
Yeah, stand up to the money. How do they stand up to the money? Because if they stand up to the money, they're going to get defeated. That's just the way, unfortunately, our system is built right now. It's legal to bribe politicians in America. It is legal. Let me say that again. It is legal in America to bribe a politician. It's written into the laws. You can bribe them. So based on that, is the politician doing anything wrong? I think he is, but he's still staying within the system. And I think until we figure that out, it's going to be hard to fix a lot of the other problems out there. But, that's where we are. And you're a delight, Samantha. Samantha Barrios, activist for Florida State Director of Giffords. Thanks so much. How was it with the kids? Did you trick or treat last night?
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, it was really nice. We went out. It was a little bit warm, but we had a Spider Woman and we had a Moon Knight going around, getting a ton of candy. Happy. They were safe. We were safe.
Did you wear a costume?
I wore a little headband that I got at a grocery store yesterday last minute. So yes, I wore a costume.
Well, some of my family really, really took it a little too serious last night. One of my sons was dressed as in fact, he went all out. I mean, Robbie, oh my goodness. It looked like something you'd see when you go to Universal or something like that. He was completely in costume. It was kind of fun to watch. Yeah, I've got some pictures. I'll try and put them up on our website. Samantha Arias, thank you for being with us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Rick. It was a pleasure. Muchísimas gracias.
Igualmente. God bless.
Hasta luego. Amen.
You know, here at Agua Media, we follow stories from time to time, which we think also capture the imagination of Americans. Now, obviously, the attack on Paul Pelosi, that's an obvious one. And I'm still somewhat stupefied with why the media seems to not be giving it what I think is the attention it deserves. Not to come at it from the left or come at it from the right, but just to talk about what it means to suddenly live in a country where someone tries to kidnap or kill the, third leading member of our government? That's all that I'm saying, and I think it's important. There's another story we've been following, by the way, here at Agua Media and on Rick Sanchez News. And so many of you have been reaching out to us and following us here on Rick Sanchez News. And you can follow us on Spotify or on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. We also post a lot of our stuff on TikTok and on YouTube. So that said, do me a favor. If you think some of these conversations are important, share them. Share them with someone, because that's how we all grow. And that's how we're able to have conversations that are meaningful amongst ourselves, rather than a lot of the hate-filled rhetoric that we hear out there these days from both sides, much of which is incorrect from both sides, because I see it, I hear it, which is why these days I've turned off cable news. I used to love to watch cable news. And as you know, I was cable news. I mean, I once had the highest rated show on CNN, Rick's List. I can't watch cable news anymore. I can't watch it. I think they're feeding into this frenzy. This Paul Pelosi situation, it's a frenzy. This man, David DePappy, he's part of that frenzy. Maybe even a victim of it in a certain way. No? And the other big story that I have not, I'll just tell you, I've been like a kid with candy. I cannot separate myself from it, is the story of this suspect who has now been found guilty of running over some 60 to 70 people. It's amazing to hear the story of Derek Brooks. And Derek Brooks defends himself in court, loses. We've done podcasts about it. You can go back and look at those podcasts just last week. And now it comes to the sentencing phase of his trial. And there he is. There he is in court again. A mass murderer. A mass murderer is in court acting as his own defense attorney, and the relationship between him and the judge is something to behold. If you haven't watched any of this stuff, you must. Yes, Darrell Brooks. What did I say? I called him Derek. I apologize. Darrell Brooks. The relationship between Darrell Brooks and the judge in this case has been like a cat fight. And she has to a certain extent put up with him because he's the attorney. And she doesn't want him and hold him in contempt of court, because if she does, then the whole case could be thrown out. So she's already gone through all that. He's already been found guilty. I think he received 800 years in prison. And now it's the sentencing phase. And he comes out during the sentencing phase as well. Here, let me let you hear a clip. This is Judge Jennifer Darrow, who, by the way, is now very popular. People are writing to her. She has got this huge fan club. People have been watching this trial just like they watched the Johnny Depp trial. And they've been responding to the characters. And like everything else, there's the characters they like and the characters they don't like. She's obviously one of the likable characters. Why? Patience. Patience. She has shown patience I don't think any one of us are capable of. Or maybe we are. What's that? Pan de Dios. Yes. The bread of Christ. I mean, here she is now the case is over, and she now has to deal with a new issue. This is about the ankle bracelets that the suspect was wearing while he was in court. Here's Judge Jennifer Darrow.
I want to make a record specifically as it relates to the restraints that the Sheriff's Department utilized during this case, given a comment made by Mr. Brooks when the jury was coming out the very last time. I don't recall if you said something about a stun belt or shackles or something to that effect, but it was inaccurate.
So now, after all this is over, Darrell Brooks is making the argument that he was being forced to wear some kind of shock bracelet on his ankles so that they could control him. And whenever he said something they didn't like, they would then press the button and shock him to make him stop. And that's what he said was going on during the trial. Again, think about what we've been talking about during this podcast. There will be people out there who will say, aha, see, that's what the man does. That's what the man does. They were taking this poor guy and they were controlling him because he was defending himself. And who knows, maybe he's innocent. And maybe it's all a giant setup. And maybe it wasn't him driving the car. Maybe somebody else was making the car drive on its own when he ran over 61 or 70 people. And then in court, they put these shock devices on him. Yes, he had a bracelet on his knee because a lot of people were afraid that he would lunge at the defense attorney or at the judge or at one of the witnesses because he was acting crazy throughout the trial, oftentimes staring at the judge with this angry, furrowed brow. Did you see when he did that? I mean, when I watched that man's face, I thought he was going to go after the judge. And she thought he was going to go after the judge. She thought she was going to be attacked by him. So here he is now arguing with the judge, or making his case, I should say, about this the shock device that they had on his ankles.
It was a shock device. I was told it was a shock device.
Mr. Brooks,
And
that's
it was
why
covered
I'm
up.
making the record.
It was covered up by a black cloth, so the jury purposely could not see it, and so that the public cannot see it. I was told that a chair had to be placed on my side so that no one can see that I was shackled with ankle shocks. I think the public should know that. The jury should have known that.
Now, those of you who've seen trials, I'm sure understand that, yes, he was shackled, if you want to use that word. The way the police department describes it is that he had soft ankle bracelets on. Soft is the word they use. Look, whether it was soft or hard, whatever. But yes, and they covered them with a blanket in front of his table because they don't want to prejudice the jury. If the jury sees that he's literally shackled and tied down because he's so dangerous, they could possibly use that against him. So what they're doing is they're trying to create a situation where the jury doesn't think he's guilty simply because of the fact that he's shackled. So they're trying to protect him against the prejudicial nature of a jury who would take that and read it that way. And that's why they also made the defense attorneys not get up and walk around, because they had to keep him with a 4-foot tether tied to his table. That's how they describe it. And then they told the defense team, the plaintiffs, the prosecutors, the government, representing the state of Wisconsin, sorry, but you're going to have to, interview witnesses and present your case sitting down just like he does and not leaving the locality of your table, because the audience the jury would then look at that and say, well, how come they can walk around, but he can't walk around? That doesn't seem fair. So it looks like they went out of their way to make it fair for him. And he's instead saying, oh no, it was because you were shocking me. Here he is arguing with the judge.
Can we move on to subject matter jurisdiction that hasn't been proved for the record?
All right, so
Can we move on to that?
Mr. Brooks, I really don't want to remove you from the courtroom today. But
I don't want to
to
be removed, but you're not going to sit here and tell me on the record what was on my body when I was told what it was.
All right, one more interruption and you will go to the other courtroom.
Well, they need to know that.
Stop.
They need to know that. They need to know the truth.
I'm going to ask the state some questions. If you interrupt when I do that, you will be removed to the other courtroom.
Remove me then.
All right,
Remove
attorney.
me
Attorney
It's
Basie.
not gonna stop the fact that they need
All
to
right,
know that a shock device
he's
was on my
interrupted.
ankles.
I'm sorry, everyone. We'll have to clear the courtroom. He'll be removed to the other courtroom. I'll make the
That's
appropriate
fine. Tell the
findings.
truth, though, Your Honor. Tell the truth.
Can you believe this? Can you believe this? This is all throughout the trial, and now it's in the sentencing phase, and who knows what's going to happen next when the families come next, what is that, in a couple of days from now, right? We're going to have that for you here. The families are now going to go to court, and they're going to look at this man and tell them what they think of him and probably cry and be saddened and, yeah. Victim statements, yeah, which is now part of the law in most states, including Wisconsin. And by the way, his mother's going to show up, I think, as well, and talk about what a great kid he is. And so he's going to have his people there, and he's going to be there, probably commenting and yelling at them, and they're going to yell at him. Who knows what the hell's going to happen here? Who knows? This thing has been a circus. I've never seen anything like this before. So finally, they have to call for the record, because what they're trying to do here is make sure there isn't an appeal, or at least a successful appeal. So now they call a corrections officer to the stand so the judge could interview him and ask him as a witness, did you guys have shock anklets on the defendant, on Mr. Brooks? Or did anybody even ever tell him that those were, by the way, I wouldn't be surprised if just as a joke, they told him that, even though they're not, just to play with him, and then he decided, and even so what? One of the questions nobody ever asks is, were you ever shocked? Were you ever shocked? Nobody asked him that. Were you ever shocked? But here's the corrections officer now on the stand, speaking to this charge that he brings forward where he actually had shocks on his ankles.
None of your fellow deputies told me that it was a shock device when I asked what was being placed on my ankles at the start of this trial?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that you're aware of? Do you know for sure that I was told that they were a shock device?
I don't believe that's the truth. I believe every time you had those devices put on, I was in there, and it was either myself or Deputy Stengelson putting them on, and I did not tell you that, nor did I ever hear Deputy Stengelson tell you that they were an electronic device.
And you said that it was an ankle restraint. Did it have any metal parts?
Yes.
And what are those metal parts?
Metal part is where a strap went through and the locking device.
Here you have the prisoner who's already been convicted and will spend the rest of his lifetimes, 8 in prison, questioning on the stand his corrections officer, his prison guard, right? Who, by the way, is going to be taking him back at some point, and he's antagonistically questioning him on the stand. I've just never seen anything like this. I've never seen anything like this. It speaks to several things. You know, we like to sometimes question some of the things about our country and our institutions, but I'll tell you that. In what other country can you defend yourself and stand up to the judge and talk to the judge and disrespect the judge and argue with the judge and yell at the judge and then ask that the corrections officer who's guarding you in prison be put on the stand so you can do the same thing to him? I mean, those are his rights. And we live in a country where those rights are guaranteed by the Constitution. So as bizarre, as circus-like as this has been, it has been fascinating to watch and fascinating to consider that a man has a right to defend himself. Of course, he then has a client who is a fool, because that's what they say. A defendant who defends himself has a client who's a fool for a client. And in this case, it proved to be true, because he wasn't able to do it. And so many times the judge would turn to him and say, I can't help you be a lawyer because you're not a lawyer. And there's a reason people go to school to become lawyers. Just like I always say, there's a reason that I went to journalism school and spent 5 years there learning how to be a journalist. And it saddens me today to turn on cable news and see most of the people who have newscasts, most of the people who have shows on cable news are not journalists, have never practiced journalism, and never got a journalism degree. at least maybe I could say this. Maybe they're the Daryl Brooks of my profession. So it is what it is. Hey, thanks so much for joining us once again, my friend. I'm glad you're there, and I'm glad we're able to have these conversations about some of the things that are going on in our country right now. I would love to hear your perspective. I'd love for you to tell me what you think. Reach out to us. Reach out to us on our website at aguamedia.com. Tell your friends that we're here. You can catch us, obviously, on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you happen to be watching us on YouTube, as we always like to say, subscribe. Dale, ándale, y vamos con todo y con Latino attitude, latitud.
Agua.